Good morning, Exit Church family. I am Alexander Breytenbach, and I am excited to be continuing our Devo series this morning on the names of God. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 14, verses 18 through 20 today. So if you have a Bible or you're listening along, I would encourage you just to pause right now, pull that out if you have access to it so you can follow along in the text with me. Again, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 14 today. We're going to be covering the name of God, Elyon. And this is two different words when they're put together that help us to describe what God is like. So El is just the generic term in the Canaanite pantheon for a god who is usually the one who's like in charge of all the other gods or seen as a powerful god. So the most simple definition for that is the strong and powerful one. So El just means the strong and powerful one. And then Elyon, the second part of that term, is a modifying verb or a modifying term that helps us to understand something's position. Though in this case, it means the Most High. So if you say El Elyon, you are talking about God, the Most High. Or if you're putting it very simply, it is the Most High, strong and powerful one. And so that helps you to better understand the nature of the Jewish God, and then ultimately the God that we as Christians today serve. He is the Most High and powerful God. Okay? So that's what happens when you put those two terms together. And they actually only appear 3 times together in the whole Old Testament. And that would be twice in the passage we're about to read in Genesis 14, and then once in Psalm 78, verse 35. And the rest of the time that you see it in the text, it's actually just an off reference to the Most High. And based on the context, you can tell they're talking about God. So for example, they'll say the Most High, and you infer that they are talking about God because it's kind of like in a generic term. Okay, so the only times though that El Elyon appear together really is in this text and then again in Psalms. So I'm going to read Genesis 14, and it starts off in verse 18. It says, "And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, and he was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." So a little background on this text. Abram, at this point in time in Genesis where we find him, he's a monotheist, which is totally different than any of the other people who are around him. Most of the Canaanites at this time were pantheists, or they believed in a pantheon, which means that they served many gods depending on one for the sun, one for the fertile harvest, one for fertility for women, like all kinds of different stuff. But Abram specifically was a monotheist, meaning he worshipped one true, all-powerful, mighty God. And we get introduced to that right when we meet Abram in the opening chapters of when he's introduced in Genesis. Okay? And then Melchizedek, this other character, the priest and king of Salem, is also a worshiper of this Most High God. And so this unique interaction is both Melchizedek and Abram acknowledging or putting name to the deity that they serve as the Most High God, or a God unlike any of the other gods that is being served at the time. Okay? So that is kind of what's happening in the text. And this sounds different to us because they worshipped many gods, but one of the things that if you took it from that context and applied it today, it's very similar to how we in Western civilization are. We worship things like money, career success, fame, relationships, comfort, and our own names sometimes. And we worship a whole host of these things, usually all thinking that they'll play nicely and fit well together. And this is actually very contrast to the biblical idea of worshiping God. And so Abram and Melchizedek are going to very clearly acknowledge that they worship the one true Most High God. And this is good news for us because if it's true that there's one Most High God, then that should inform how we worship and how we prioritize things. So if you look at life through that lens, through the lens of only one true Most High God, then things become a lot less confusing. Jesus actually talks about this in Matthew 6:24. Then he says that no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and then love the other, or he will despise the one and be devoted to the other. And God, being the highest, is the one who it would make sense if we put our comfort and our trust and our hope in him, because he is the most high of all of the gods. So if you have a choice to serve a lesser God or God Most High, it would actually be a very wise decision for you to serve God Most High. And this is great because I don't know if you're anything like me, but something that paralyzes me is information overload. So when I have many voices or many sources of information coming at me, telling me how to think, how to act, how to make decisions on certain issues, it can be very easy to get caught up in all the different voices and confused as to which one I should listen to. But if I know that I serve God Most High, then his voice is the only one that should count. And that gives me tremendous comfort when I'm making decisions, when I'm going about my day, and asking the question, is this in service to God Most High? So the question for you then, as you are listening, is, do you worship him as if he is the highest God? Or do you try to kind of tuck him in nicely with all the other things that you like to worship? Does God serve a religious purpose for you, and then money is really your means of security? Or is he Lord over all things in your life? So one of the hymns that actually kind of coincides very nicely to this is a hymn called Be Thou My Vision. It was written initially in Ireland, and it kind of speaks to the situation they had there. Ireland at the time was a bunch of city-states, which means they had kings that ruled the native region, but then all of Ireland was governed by one king. So there's one king who sits over all these other smaller kings and their smaller kingdoms. And so when the hymn writer who wrote this, and it's an unknown writer, he addresses God in terms of this hierarchy, and he says, "Thou and thou only, first in my heart, High King of heaven, my treasure thou art. High King of heaven, my victory won, may I reach heaven's joys, O bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all." So if you'd like to, it will be linked below if you want to follow along with that. I hope you have a wonderful day.